Everybody, I'm Steve Kress. I'm the director of Project Puffin and Audubon's Seabird Restoration Program, and thank you for taking the time to join us today on this live chat. We have a lot of people out on the islands. I just got back from visiting several of the Seabird Islands, and happy to be back on the mainland to talk to you about what we're seeing on the islands, inside the puffin burrows, and beyond. So I think what we'll do is I'll be here and ask your questions, and I'll try to provide some answers.
So maybe you could start out, Steve, by telling us a little bit more about what we can expect in the coming days as baby Hope starts to grow up and lose her downy feathers.
Okay, we're very excited that on Seal Island, our little puffin chick that we've named Hope hatched, and now about a week into this, in fact just a week today, what we're seeing is that Hope is getting meals. Puffins are generally fed at least a couple times a day, sometimes more. She seems to be getting the meals. We're pleased that most of those meals are small enough that she can swallow them, which was a concern last year. The foods that come in, what we can hope so far for baby Puffin Hope, a healthy puffin chick will become increasingly active inside the burrow. They are their development is called precocial, like a chicken. They walk as soon as they hatch, and later they'll be running. She already has developed a little toilet area in the back of the burrow, which she uses. And I say she, we don't really, of course, know that this is a male or female because it's very difficult to sex them. There's no way you can sex a baby puffin chick, even the adults. But similar. But regardless, she's got this little toilet area. We're seeing her back into this and squirt her droppings in one spot. This is part of the kind of fastidious habits of puffins in the burrow. I think this happens because it's very important for the chick to stay clean and its feathers to grow without any oiling from defecation or fish, and that way when they fledge, that is they head off as an age of independence, they're perfectly waterproofed. So one thing we will watch for in the coming weeks, if all continues to go well inside the burrow, is this bathroom area will move increasingly close to the entranceway. This is nothing short of sanitation, and the chicks will become increasingly active. Eventually, she'll back out to the entranceway and squirt her droppings outside and then race back in. As her legs get stronger, she'll be very active running around. We've already seen a few encounters of her chasing insects inside the burrow. Whether it's hard to tell whether she's actually eating these. I'd love that if people see her actually consume an insect or some sort of invertebrate in the burrow. I'd really be interested in this. And I'd say up front that what we're seeing in puffins has never been seen before. Never in high definition a complete development of a puffin chick underground. Last year we had a good start with it by Puffin Petey. We got a couple of weeks into this, but it was cut short. So I'm very interested in not just the survival, but the actual behaviors of this bird in the chick itself. For example, this invertebrate chasing. You've probably noticed that the burrow is alive with creatures, especially at night. And the two things I see most in there are the camel crickets, which is an insect that hops about. They're kind of light-colored, almost cave-like. They're eating the dead plant material, and then, as is the isopods, sow-bug-like creatures, little crustaceans that run around at night, hard armadillo-like looking animals that I've seen little Hope chasing these already. Let me know if you see or eat them. I think the chasing is probably the beginning of hunting behavior in puffins. Soon she'll be underwater doing the same kind of thing for real with chasing fish and shrimp for winter meals. So other things we might see, we should watch carefully for the interactions with the adults and the hope, because that's also little known. When I started the translocation project and I brought puffins from Newfoundland, we put the puffins inside of the burrow, and we hoped that they would be happy just with us dropping fish in, and it turns out that they had it off, but really what we see when we look in the burrow, you see a lot of time where the adult is sitting on the chick, even though the chick is thermoregulated, which means it can maintain its own body temperature. Still, the adults are in there with the bird, with the chick, and they're brooding it, keeping it warm perhaps, but also interacting. And what that really means to the little puffin chick, it's hard to know, but it seems to be really part of it. You'll see the little chick peeking out from under the wings of the parent as it holds it close. Another thing we saw last year, I want to watch more for it, is what's called allopreening. I saw it among the mated pair, the parents, preening each other's neck feathers. That's something you just don't see outside the burrow. We rarely see that puffins doing that outside. Razorbills do this a lot. The big cousin, the big black and white razorbills on the rock, you see them allopreening, that is preening the neck feathers the bird can't take care of on their own. Inside the burrow, I was watching Hope's parents doing that to each other, but we also see them doing it to the chick. The adult preening little Hope's down. Soon they'll start doing it for the feathers as well. The development of preening behavior in Hope. We don't see a lot of it yet, but let's watch for it. She doesn't have a whole lot to preen yet. She's just covered in what's called natal down. Soon that natal down will be replaced by contour feathers, and feathers, the hundreds of feathers that a seabird has, have to be managed very carefully. The veins of the feathers are constantly spread through the beak, hooks the little barbules together. Later, the condition of those feathers is a life affecting condition, because they have to shed water perfectly. There's even a small little leak in their waterproofing, but the chick would be doomed, because it's going to spend the next 2 years or more just floating on the ocean surface.
Great. So we have a question here from Morgan Puff. Do both parents care for Hope?
Morgan's last name is Puff?
These are just the handles they have on their comments.
Oh my God. Do both parents take care of Hope? Yes. Both parents share incubation. Both parents feed the chick. And that's fairly common as a general rule among birds where the sexes look alike. They both share. And that said, I wish we, and maybe we will eventually figure out a very quick way to recognize the male and female, because this burrow cam gives us a great opportunity to really get new insight into that sharing. Even if we didn't know which was the mother and which was the father, we'd at least know that one bird was doing more than the other. But watch for that and help us try to figure out whether there are distinctions between these two birds. I suspect that when we finally figure that out, we'll find that one parent is doing more than the other. That's just the nature of parenting. What are the
major differences between male and female puffins?
So, a question some people ask, what is the difference between a male and female puffin? Physically, the male is a little larger. His beak is proportionally a little larger than the females, and also his neck is thicker. He will weigh a little bit more. His bill measurements would be larger. So size is really about all you can say as far as the difference between the two. As far as their behavior goes, as I said, once the egg is laid, they both take turns incubating it. And that's necessary because it's a long incubation. There's no way that one bird could incubate an egg for 42 days. And Hope hatched actually, I think, on the 42nd day, which was typical incubation, a very normal incubation. So that bodes well for her state of development. She didn't hatch early, didn't hatch late. Just like giving birth in mammals, you don't want to have the chicken the egg too long, because if it's in the egg too long, it's going to be weakened. It's going to use up too much of its yolk inside, and the yolk, whatever's left after the chick hatches, is a booster to keep it going the first few days. So the difference between the male and female, yet to be determined. Let's work together on this one.
So a lot of people also have questions about if we're going to ban baby Hope or ban the parents.
So I hope that we can ban Hope. I hope she lives long enough and survives fledging. We would not ban her until about 3 weeks of age. At that age, the leg should be as large as it's ever going to get. Well, not as large as it's ever going to get, but be large enough to hold the band, so the band won't slip off the end of her foot. So you can't band a little chick, or the band will just fall off. Once the band goes on, it's going to be on there through adult life, and you don't want it to fall off before the leg is large enough. We may weigh Hope before we band her to first get a baseline on her growth and her development. But we'll probably band her about 3 weeks. If we have an opportunity, we will also band the parents.
A lot of people have questions about baby Hope's development in the sense that her beak looks very different than her parents' beaks. When is she going to develop that bright and colorful beak? And maybe you can talk a little bit about of why the beak looks like how it does.
So puffins have this characteristically flattened beak, laterally compressed beak, like somebody squished the beak together. Very unusual in seabirds. Only the puffins have this in such a dramatic way. And one might wonder why. Why all the birds have these pointed beaks or duck-shaped beaks, and this bird has got this beak from the flat side. There are probably a couple of good reasons for why. First, I think it helps to give the puffin a very distinct appearance in any lighting situation at great distances. Puffins are very social birds. They need to recognize each other from great distances in order to be safe. You rarely see a puffin sitting by itself on a rock or in the water. They almost always are sitting with at least one other puffin, and often in large flocks, because there's safety from predators that way. If a great blackback gull or a peregrine falcon were to come swooping in on a single puffin, it wouldn't have a chance. Puffins fly fast, up to 55 miles an hour, but a peregrine falcon can fly twice as fast or more. And so puffins don't sit by themselves, they have to find each other. So this is one clue, all-purpose clue, that no matter any lighting, any angle, a puffin looks very different because of that beak. It's distinctive silhouettes. And birds of all species use eyesight as the primary way to find food and find each other. So that's one reason. Now beyond that, puffins have the ability to carry large numbers of fish in their beak, and that beak is a good tool for that because it's long and narrow, and the roof of the mouth has spines that point backwards that helps hold the fish up against the roof of the mouth, so they can drape fish over that long beak, and they can hold up to 62 fish, which is the world record. Now why would it need to be so broad and high to carry fish? Because when the bird is flying through the air, the shape of the beak acts as a background support, so the fish is held flat against the beak and not flopping back and forth. Otherwise, they'd be scissored off by the sharp mandibles and fall in the water, and they maybe flew miles to get that fish. And if in the wind and flapping, they breaks off part of the fish, it'd be a bad day. So another reason the puffins have this big beak is that it provides like a billboard for the puffins to display their colors. Puffins have this, when they're at least 2 years of age, they get a bright orange beak with the blue base and the bright colors around it. And those colors are a way to display age and sexual maturity and probably health as well. I say health because it takes a lot of pigments to produce that, and birds that put down pigments generally have a good diet and they're in pretty good body shape. Puffins, like all birds probably, the female is recognizing the males that are in good health and proper age to breed with, and so they are assessing the characteristics of the male's beak in mate selection. And one can only assume that the male is doing the same thing with the female. If she doesn't have the bright color, he's not going to want to pair with her either. So bright colors are indicators of age and health and sexual fitness.
So there have been a lot of questions about the fish that are coming into the burrow. And they all are, people have been watching and they know what happened last year with PD. And maybe you can talk a little bit about the context of PD for those who might not know. And a little bit about the fish we're seeing coming into the burrow. Some people are worried. They want to know if puffins can even eat butterfish. And that kind of relates, I think, to some of these questions that we have about how puffin populations are doing this year, as well as on Seal Island specifically.
So puffins feed their young fish. We know surprisingly little about what adult puffins eat because as soon as they eat it, it's gone. And puffins spend most of their life at sea, far from land, and very little is known about their winter life, anything about it, including what they eat for most of the year. The adults probably have a much broader range of foods. They probably eat everything from small marine worms to small shrimp, small fish, perhaps even macroplankton like little crustaceans. But when it comes to raising chicks, they feed their young fish almost exclusively if they can. It seems that puffins have a search, like most predators, have a search image of a certain size prey, and that's over time been naturally selected. If a puffin were to tackle too big of a fish, it probably neither could catch it, it'd be a waste of time and energy, or it could be injured in the trying to subdue, and it couldn't carry the fish even if it caught a bigger fish. So there are upper limits to how big of a fish they can catch. That said, I've seen some puffins come back with fish so long that they're dragging the tail of the fish on the ground. That's a big fish, probably too big of a fish for a chick to swallow. Most puffins go after little fish, 1 inch long up to maybe 3 or 4 inches long, and they fly these back and holding them in their beak, as I mentioned before, many at a time. In Maine, an average beak load is 6 to 10 fish, not very big usually, and that's good. We see sometimes more. One thing that is sort of interesting about the puffin's selection of these fish is that it will eat fish, it'll capture fish all in the right length, not too small, not too big, but they don't seem to think too much about the shape of the fish. Shape of fish turns out to be very important. The bigger the fish up to a point is a good thing. A herring is a pretty broad-bodied fish, but it's not so broad that a baby puffin can't swallow it. And what we found last year, the extreme end of this shape is a round-bodied fish, and there's a fish that is found in the Gulf of Maine called the butterfish, sometimes called the dollar fish because it's round, it looks like a silver dollar. That fish, if it's too large, and the puffins bring these back too early in the season, the chicks can't swallow them. And last year, there were either a superabundance of these butterfish, or there were not other kinds of fish to dilute them, and the puffins were bringing back these butterfish. I've been at this for 40 years, and I have documented the earliest years of the program. We were seeing puffins carrying butterfish. It's not a new fish to the Gulf of Maine by any means. However, we are seeing, and it seems like, and the fisheries people support this, there's more butterfish now than there used to be. It's center of its range further south. It may be a fish that's benefiting from climate change. That is, as the Gulf of Maine is getting warmer, butterfish is becoming more common. That's not good news for little puffins and terns and most other small seabirds, just because of the shape of the fish is too round. And last year we suspected they were larger than, well, we know they were larger than usual. We determined this by comparing them to the length of the puffin's beak. And so every time we record a puffin feeding, a puffin flying in with fish for its chick, we record how big those fish are compared to the length of the beak, and those kind of measurements showed that they were larger than ever last year. And that might have been because last year was a very early year. The plankton bloom, that is when the plankton are most abundant, happened almost 2 months earlier than usual last year. It caused a lot of early changes in the breeding cycle, and the puffins and butterfish were growing longer and faster, and with the warmer water and the early start, and they were big. And little puffin Petey, the chick that was in this burrow last year, starved, and we didn't realize it at the time because he was so small and they're covered in down, but he was not able to get enough of these down, and the other fish were not making up a large enough proportion of his meals, and therefore he died, and so did about half of the puffin chicks on Seal Island and at Matinicus Rock last year. So that was very sad and I think related to climate change.
Speaking of things like climate change and food supply, are there other signs that the fish populations are really shifting? Maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Somebody also specifically asked if the proliferation of lionfish may be affecting the food supply along the East Coast. Yeah.
I've heard that lionfish, which was originally a aquarium fish, was accidentally introduced into the warmer waters, but I don't think they're very common here in the Gulf of Maine yet, and I have not heard that to be any kind of a significant problem. But last summer, lobstermen were catching triggerfish in their lobster traps. The triggerfish is definitely a warm water fish, a very characteristic warm water fish. For a lobsterman to pull up a lobster trap with a lobster and a triggerfish at the same time, that was a pretty clear example of a warm water fish moving up in the Gulf of Maine. The arrival of warm water fish is only half the story. The other is the departure of the cold water fish, and that is happening. At least 36 species of cold water fish in the Gulf of Maine, I understand from colleagues at NOAA, have moved further to the north and to the east. And some of those are important foods for puffins. We're most concerned about the white hake. The white hake is the primary food for puffins in this part of its range. It's only the young stage. They live on the surface and down, probably to about 50 feet, and they are very key fish. As they get older, they drop even deeper, probably out of the range where puffins certainly where terns can feed them. But when they're young, they are in the feeding range where seabirds can catch them, and they have made up characteristically the most important for puffins as part of the summer. So this year we are seeing much higher proportion of white hake and some Atlantic herring. Herring is the other key important food for puffins in the Gulf of Maine. Some parts of the Gulf more than others. And when we see puffins bring back herring, that's an especially good food. It's fatty, and it's got the right bulk and the right shape to slip down the puffin chicks.
So how many times a day should a puffin chick get fed? If people are watching and they're trying to gauge how well baby Hope is doing.
Well, the number of feedings per day varies, and there's not a lot of research on this. In order to really get that pinned down, you'd have to sit in a blind from dawn to dark and not leave at all, and that's pretty hard to do. But we have pieced this together, and it seems like anywhere from 2 to 5 feedings is about normal for a puffin chick. And of course, it depends how many fish are in those feedings and the size and shape of those feedings as well.
Okay.
So I should say some days I don't think puffins chicks may not be fed at all, but that's okay if they've been fed well on previous days.
People have also been asking, they've noticed that baby Hope is being left alone in the burrow sometimes. Maybe you could talk a little bit about if that's okay or expected for her to be alone for long periods of the day, and where the parents go during that period.
So the puffin chicks, when they first hatch, are probably not able to maintain their body temperature, just like a baby chicken. You have to put them in a brooder. And so in nature, birds take care of that by sitting on the chicks and brooding them. But underground breeding is in itself a way to solve that problem. We've measured the air temperature inside of burrows and find it's remarkably constant at about 55 degrees Fahrenheit day and night. And that's a big help. So there's not a lot of fluctuation, but the baby bird's temperature has to be a little over 100 degrees. So it's got to be almost twice as warm. Where does it get that heat from? Either from its parents or from itself. And if it's coming from itself, it means it has to eat a lot because it's burning up that fuel to keep warm. And if it doesn't have enough fuel to metabolize and get the energy out of the food, it'll lose it because of loss of body heat, and that's the teetering point the little chick has to face it. In order to grow, in order even just to stay alive, it has to eat enough food to maintain its body temperature.
Great. Someone named Evelyn G asked if you could summarize the most effective measures that you've taken over the years to restore populations of puffin, razorbills, and other seabirds on the islands off of the Maine coast.
So the puffins that we've restored on the Maine coast, what we did was to take advantage of their natural history. That is, in short, the puffin chick is fed by its parents. It is fledges at about 6 weeks of age. It heads off to sea by itself without any parental care. So knowing that, we managed to get a system of collecting puffin chicks in Newfoundland and transporting these to Maine quickly, hand rearing them in artificial burrows, which meant sod burrows, chunks of sod laid out that create burrows for each chick. And then we were the foster parents. We took the handfuls of fish, usually about 6 thumb-sized pieces of fish, frozen, thawed them, put vitamins in the fish, put those in the mouths of the burrows. Little chicks picked these up, lived there for about a month, and then headed off to sea by themselves, making a map of where home was, and they came back. That process was very slow. It took, on each of the 2 restoration sites in Maine, Eastern Egg Rock and Seal Island, it took 8 years from the time we started moving chicks to the time we had any nesting of recolonized birds. That demonstrated for the first time that it was possible to restore a colony of seabirds extirpated by people through translocation. To encourage birds to come ashore, we started using decoys as life-size decoys that would be that we would put out on rocks and encourage some of these translocated puffins to land, and that worked remarkably well. And the decoys and sound recordings, which we've also used, audio recordings, that method, and now called social attraction, is probably our most effective approach because it's very applicable to many kinds of seabirds and now increasing numbers of land birds as well.
So maybe you could talk a little bit about the population of puffins on Seal Island. Somebody asked if they live there year round, and maybe talk a little bit about why puffins off the coast of Maine are pretty unique.
So Maine is the southernmost limit for Atlantic puffins in the North Atlantic. They historically were found from Maine, mid-coast of Maine. That is about the Damariscotta or Rockland area, north to Labrador and Greenland and Iceland. Some of the little colonies are in eastern Russia and Spitsbergen. And then there are colonies, the puffins found all the way south through Europe, the European islands, and then south to the Brittany coast of France. So they have this big range, and the puffins live throughout this range year round. So, is there more to that question?
Maybe talk a little bit also about if they live there year round.
Oh yes. Okay. So once we restored the puffins through moving puffin chicks and having them head off to sea, some of them remembered the island, came back, nested, and then helped to attract others. The colony has grown to about 500 pairs on Seal Island, and by mid-August, all 500 pair are getting restless. The ocean is pulling on them, and they head back to sea, heading off shore. And they stay then at sea until the following year. We're not sure exactly where they go, but we know that they stay in the North Atlantic. We have put little geolocators on their legs, and those geolocators then attach the legs, and they tell us that the puffins, only two have we got recovered so far, but that they moved north up into the Grand Banks, Gulf of St. Lawrence, Labrador, and then they turned around and they came south to spend the rest of the winter in Bermuda. So this is kind of Puffin's world. That means they're not at the nesting islands year round. You wouldn't expect to see a puffin there even in late August, and they won't come back until the following April. They're perfectly adapted for living at sea. In fact, I've often thought that they probably wouldn't come to land at all if they didn't have the burden of laying an egg, because they can't do that at sea, and have to raise their little chick somehow at sea. So they lay the egg, and only the outermost islands are safe enough for them to do it, because the islands close to the mainland are populated by predators such as skunks and fox and minks and raccoons and all those sharp-toothed animals that love to eat birds.
So, what are some of the predators that will hunt the puffins off the coast on our islands?
So the puffins when they're on Seal Island, they have to be constantly on the lookout for gulls. Great blackback gull and herring gulls can take an adult puffin, and they can also take their eggs and chicks out of their burrows if they can get to them. And now we also have to be on the watch for peregrine falcons and bald eagles. The peregrines can take adult puffins. We've seen them do it, and they can kill them and just pluck them, eat them right on the rocks. And the bald eagles, they can't get into the colony so much, but they would try.
So what's the significance?
A bald eagle can be quite agile, flying low along of a sleeping puffin. It can easily be snagged by an eagle.
What's the significance of the researchers who are out on the islands, and what is it that they do exactly out there in the summers?
So as you watch the cameras, you might see young college-age students walking around on the island. These are our research assistants and our island supervisor. We have a supervisor who lives on Seal Island during the summer from late May through early August. And her job is to supervise about another 4 college-age students, and what their day sort of goes like this. They'll spend the morning doing a count of the whole island, and then they will spend about 3 hours in a bird blind telescope, reading the leg bands on the puffins. The bird blinds are close enough to the rocky ledges where they can sit, read the leg bands, and then they can also spend the afternoon doing several things. One might be doing a feeding study of the puffins, watching to see what kinds of fish they're bringing in. They do the same thing with terns, from blinds just a few feet away from the tern nests, and learning not just to recognize the kinds of birds, but the kinds of fish that the birds are bringing back. And they're very good at this, very quick at this, and they'll fly in. We also band puffin chicks, which means pulling them out of their burrows, weighing and measuring them to assess their health, and we do the same thing for tern chicks. This tells us much about the quality of life in the ocean, not just the quality of life on land as seen through seabirds.
Perhaps you could talk also about, this is a little bit of an older one here, when it is that Baby Hope is going to develop that bright, colorful beak, and when she's going to come back and start her own family, and where that'll be.
So Baby Hope will have this black beak when she leaves Seal Island in 6 weeks, and will have that until the following spring. It'll then get a little bit of color in it. She probably won't come back that second summer. She'll stay at sea to around about 2 full years, and then in the spring she'll come back. But she won't land. She will probably maybe not even come ashore. She may just sit on the water. If she does land, she'll be very timid and just land on the outermost rocks. We put decoys out in part to attract the birds and encourage them to land where we can see them. And during when she's 2 years old and 3 and probably 4, she'll be traveling between other Maine islands, picking out a nesting site and finding a mate. And she may keep that mate the rest of her life. In her 4th year old, she will probably build a artificial, she'll build her first nest. It won't be a functional nest, but she'll build a nest in a rock crevice, and she and her mate will honeymoon there full summer, without an egg. Maybe the following year she'll lay the first egg, and she may keep laying that egg. Last year we had one puffin that was 35 years old, one of our birds from Newfoundland, and she laid an egg, raised a chick in her 35th year. That's just about a world record for puffins' longevity.
That's great. So if people wanted to get more involved with Project Puffin or support somehow what it is that they're seeing, what are the best ways that they could do that? And also, are there things that they could do besides supporting Project Puffin that might help with, the fish loss that we're seeing, or any of this stuff that has to do with climate change?
So for starts, I think that the best thing for puffins in Maine is to protect the existing colonies, to make sure that they are producing as many young as possible. And that means several things. That means, first of all, keeping the college age interns on the islands, because their presence deters predators like bald eagles and peregrines and great blackback gulls. So if we can manage and reduce the amount of predation on these colonies, all the better. The presence of the interns keeps the big predators also away from chasing off the terns, and the terns themselves help chase away some predators, but they need a hand. They can't do it by themselves. I hope that everybody that watches these cameras will help us to keep the interns on the islands, and this comes down to funding these summer positions. These are the future conservation biologists. I think of no better cause than to help the career of a future conservation biologist, someone who will dedicate their whole career to doing the things that I've done. I was fortunate when I started Project Puffin got some small grants from the Audubon Society that let me do this kind of work. Gave me my first experiences. I hope to keep doing this for other young people with Project Puffin, and that's what we did. This year we have 18 college-age interns working on Project Puffin, and that's the future. There's no greater thing people can do than to encourage these young people to be professional stewards. So projectpuffin.org, it's easy to make an online gift. It's easy to adopt a puffin. All that money goes to help support our field teams on 7 field stations on Maine Island, looking after almost all the rare and endangered species of seabirds in Maine. Beyond that, there are many things people can do at home other than supporting conservation groups like Project Puffin and Audubon. They can think about themselves as making a difference, just as I have tried to do with my life to help bring puffins and other seabirds back. People can do things in their life that can make a difference. I think our lifestyles, everybody can find ways to improve it, to use less energy, drive more efficient vehicles, replace old inefficient refrigeration furnaces, and lose less heat out of our buildings. These may seem like small things, but collectively they're necessary. Collectively we all need to be more aware of our own lifestyles and what we eat as well. Thinking about the foods that the puffins eat, we have to think about the fish that we eat. Fish have never been more popular, but also never more scarce of a food supply. There are certain sustainable kinds of fish, and I hope people will inform themselves about those. One of the best places to learn about that is through the Monterey Bay Aquarium. It has fish cards that talks about sustainability. You can print these out and walk into a restaurant. Ask the person who's serving fish in a restaurant, where did the fish come from? Just start the conversation. Keep the conversation going. Talk about climate change. It's not a secret. It's too bad that it's become a political issue. It really is a shame. It shouldn't be a political issue. Talk about it and have a conversation with people, even those that don't agree with you. Those are a few of the things that come to mind.
Speaking of, how long Project Puffin has been around, and you've been at this now for 40 years. I think a lot of people are interested to know what led you to even start Project Puffin.
So this is our 40th anniversary this year, and the exact date is coming up on July 15th, when I went to Newfoundland for the first time, and I collected 6 baby puffins in a special carrying case, and we brought them back to Maine. I had seen puffins in Canada before. I realized that puffins once bred on the Maine coast, but they were hunted for food and for feathers, and I felt that because some people caused them to disappear, other people had the obligation to try to bring them back, to try. It was never done before, so I had no idea how this would unfold. That we've been successful is a tribute to an idea that had possibilities. It's also a tribute to all the people that have helped me over the years, hundreds of interns and others, colleagues who believed in what this is all about, and it's also proof that people can, make a difference.
Some people are curious to know about your hat. Now, I don't know if there's a significance to it, but maybe you could chat really quick about that.
The hat that I like to wear, and I put it on today just so somebody would ask that question, is called a tam o' shanter. It's a Scotch hat, and this is a black watch tam. It's a great hat for this kind of work because the weather here, as in Scotland here on the Maine coast, is often foggy and rainy. In fact, I'm looking out the window of my office here right now, and it's raining and there's fog rolling in, and it would be a great hat this kind of weather. It has other values. It doesn't have a bill that goes, catches the wind and goes blowing off your head, and as you move on a power boat heading out to a seabird island. And the little tassel on the top has is the highest part of the hat, has part of the head. And when you walk into a tern colony, because puffins nest with terns, which are quite protective of their eggs and chicks, the terns will hit that ball usually, saving you from direct encounters of a tern kind.
That's great. What are the chances of Hope's survival in general? Is there a time when she's more at risk as a young chick of not making it, and what people should be looking out for? And how many? Do we know a percentage of how many puffin chicks survive their first year, or what percentage survive at sea as well?
So puffin chicks have a good chance of fledging. Most in good year, about 70% of our puffin chicks that hatch on Maine islands successfully fledge, which means they reach the point of fully feathered out, and they leave the burrow, and they toddle on down to the ocean and leap in and swim off. That's fledging. 70%. That's very high for seabirds, or for any kind of bird. And that's because the parents are experienced. They're older parents. They're not, and they don't breed till they're 5 years old, so they've already pretty seasoned survivors themselves. And they may live to be 20 years old. The adults are great survivors, so they're good parents. And they have a monogamous lifestyle. The male and female usually have the same. The pair stays together every year, return to the same burrow year after year, so that adds stability to the chances of success. They know where the feeding areas are. They know where to go to find food, and the adults, once they reach 5 years of age, they have on average about a 95% chance of surviving to the next year. Less until they're 5, but even 2-year-olds. In some years, we've seen 70 to 80% of those birds come back to the main coast. So puffins are great survivors, and that's why they can afford to lay 1 egg a year. People that are accustomed to chickens or ducks or even sparrows that have many eggs and nuts, they kind of scratch their head when they hear about the puffin. 1 egg each year, but they make it count. And so the egg has a good chance of hatching. Most of them do, and a very good chance for the chick to fledge as long as the parents can find enough food. Predators are an issue. If one of the parents were to be killed by a peregrine or a blackback gull, the surviving adult probably would not be able to raise the chick by itself. And likewise, if some predator like a mink or an otter were to get onto a puffin nesting island, it'd be a terrible threat to the birds, and it could go through and kill the birds, adults and chicks, in their nests.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about what sorts of behaviors people can expect to see when they're tuning in to either the Puffin loafing ledge cam or perhaps the burrow cam.
I love watching that Puffin loafing ledge cam because it's not just the puffins that are out there, but it's a spot to see the razorbills, the puffin's big cousin, the big black and white penguin-like razorbills, and we've been seeing some common murres landing down out there as well, another puffin relative. So the Puffin loafing ledge is really the place where it's happening. That's where the puffins go when they're loafing. And I think that it could be fascinating. Some of the things you watch for out there. Well, first of all, it's called loafing ledge for good reason. I mean, that's the thing they do the most. They rest, and they come out of the water, particularly on rough, windy days, and they sleep on the ledge. They like to sleep in company. Again, it would be a bad idea to be a sleeping puffin all by yourself out on a rock, because when the peregrine comes flying along at more than 100 miles an hour, you don't want to be sitting there alone. So they sit with a group. And the loafing ledge, if you were to back away from it, you'd see it's actually an outcrop of rock that sticks out further. So the puffins, when they're sitting there, they can take off real quick if they need to. If a blackback or a predator or a raptor would threaten them. Other behaviors, rather than sitting there and sleeping, they do a lot of preening. Remember, we have hundreds of feathers. They all have to be arranged and fluffed and waterproof. The puffins have what's called the uropygial gland. It's on their rump, and they rub their beak over it. You watch for that, and you'll see their beak will be shiny because they've been rubbing it on the uropygial gland. And then they rub the oil from the gland on their feathers, not to shed water, but to lubricate the feather so that the barbules hook together, and it's a well lubricated feather that hooks together properly, sort of like Velcro, and the water then just sort of flushes off the back of the bird and into the sea. It's funny to watch a puffin or any seabird sitting on the water. They're not wet looking because the water doesn't soak in. It just rolls off their back. And it's because they spend a lot of time on the loafing ledge looking after their several thousand feathers. And some other things, they sleep there. And you see a puffin is sleeping, tucking its beak into its wing, but don't be fooled, they're not sleeping like we sleep. They rest only half of the brain at a time. And even when they're sleeping, one of their eyes is open, looking around. Again, always on the watch. Natural selection has eliminated the deep sleepers long ago. Birds rest only part of their brain at a time. Another thing you can see birds landing. They have a special way of landing, kind of a tentative way. They'll land with their head down, their wings out, as if they were attacked. They're already half ready to go again. They haven't even bothered to fold their wings yet, so they land with a submissive sort of bow to the other puffins, and their wings out. You'll see puffins doing a penguin walk sometime. That's kind of an assertive dominance display where the birds walk around with their chest out, and they're kind of looking down just a bit on the other puffins. That's sort of like, get out of my way, I'm coming through. These kinds of displays generally prevent fights. They have another way of preventing fights called a gape. Watch for it. Two puffins will, if they get a little testy, they will face off, and they will open their beaks, and the beaks will sort of slowly open, slowly close, and they'll show off the yellow mouth lining. And that's a non-aggressive threat that says back off. The other day I saw two of them that didn't work, and they actually locked into a physical fight, and they were doing like a beak lock, and one of them finally flipped the other one off the rock, and it got dominance on the rock. And then the moment later I saw it doing a courtship with its female, probably, and they were rubbing their bills together, and that's called the billing behavior between a mated parent. Apparently somebody got too close. That tends to attract other puffins. Whenever they see a pair of billers, and it's comical to watch 3 or 4 sort of onlookers inch closer and closer and nose into the 2 billers. So there's lots going on, and it's a fun place to be. Right. Okay, so Seal Island is first of all, it's a national wildlife refuge, and it's part of the Maine Coastal Islands National Wildlife Refuge, which manages dozens of active seabird colonies along the Maine coast. It's one of the largest of these sanctuaries. Maybe it might be the largest. It's 65 acres. It has no trees. It's windswept. The vegetation there is tundra-like. It's lichens and crowberries and cranberries and low-growing shrubs. The juniper family that dominates it, and there's some lots of grassy areas. Trees and shrubs don't thrive here at all. It's about 18 miles off of Rockland, Maine, in a very windswept, extreme exposed area. In the winter, the waves are so powerful they may rise 30 or 40 feet over the island, crash over it. In the winter, we've seen winter birds like snowy owls and snow buntings living on the island. And that's the time, too, for the gray seals to come ashore. Hundreds of huge gray seals come lumbering out of the ocean upon the tern nesting habitat. They lay actually on the porch of our little field station out there in the winter and give birth to their young, late December.
So where is it that the puffins like to build their burrows, and why do they build their burrows under rocks?
So puffins nest in rock crevices usually on Seal Island, and they choose that habitat because it's really the only option. On other islands where there's deep soil, they are known to tunnel into the soil 6 or more feet deep. But on Seal Island we don't have deep pockets of soil, so they nest in rock crevices. And the rock crevices are only there because the ocean has, on Seal Island, the geology is such that chunks of rock snap off by freezing and thawing in the winter, and big waves get under them and lift them up and jumble them up on top of each other. These big rock piles are where the puffins nest. And it's not the most stable environment, even considering that each rock may weigh tons, because in the winter these big waves get under these big boulders and they can actually lift them and move them around. So it seems like a fortress, but the fact that they broke off in the first place and the fact that they move now just points to how temporary it all is out there. And there are many issues facing puffins beyond the fish. We've talked quite a bit about the kinds of fish they need. That's the obvious thing. The thing that's not so obvious is that the melting of the poles, Arctic and Antarctic, are causing the ocean levels of the planet to rise. This is not the first time this has happened. When the glaciers that covered North America 10,000 years ago melted, they too flooded the oceans. That created many of the islands that we have today. But this process is going on now faster than ever, and it's happening because of changes that humans are causing the Earth to warm. Seal Island is going to become increasingly vulnerable to this kind of problem. And a couple times over the 40 years we've been at this, we've seen big storms occur, and usually late, like in May, and on a high tide, and it has washed out puffin eggs and puffin chicks already. So ocean level rise is one of the great threats for seabirds worldwide.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about if seals are also a threat to puffins. As mentioned, the gray seals coming ashore.
Yeah, some people wonder, what do seals eat? And are they a threat to puffins? Seals are close related to bears, and they are adaptable and opportunistic animals. But they certainly don't have much of a chance when the puffins are at home. I mean, on land. That said, they could conceivably eat one sitting on the water. We've never seen it happen, but it probably has. I don't think it's a primary threat.
Do we ever practice predator control on the islands?
We have found that if we have our interns on the islands, they are the best management for predators, and that is that these big predators that I've been talking about, the gulls and the eagles, peregrines, they are naturally wary of people. And just our presence out there from early May through August is enough. If we can be close to where the birds are. If we can't, then they may slip in and take some of these birds that we're trying to protect.
Let's see. I think we're kind of getting near the end of our live chat here. If there's anything else you'd like to add, it'd be great if you could put it in. But one of my final thoughts here was somebody had asked, they said, this is Aaron, I'll be there in later July. What is the best way to see the puffins? Do tourist boats disturb them? And maybe you could talk a little bit about Hog Island.
Project Puffin has encourages ecotourism. I think one of the great values of the Puffin to many Mainers is that it's so popular that people travel to Maine from far away, and it's puffin watching along with whale watching have become two very important ecotourism industries here in Maine, and so there are puffin watches that go out. There are several in mid-coast Maine. Eastern Egg Rock, being close to the mainland, has developed followings from New Harbor and from Booth Bay and Port Clyde. And people can go out from those towns. Often they stop at our Project Puffin Visitor Center in Rockland before they go out, where they can see the live streaming on a big screen, and that's a great background for them before they go out. Another way they can visit the bird islands, and maybe one of the best ways of all, is to take part in a program on Hog Island. Hog Island is the resident Audubon camp in Maine for adults, teens, and families that want to learn more about the Maine coast birds and natural history. It's a beautiful 330-acre island. It's where Explore.org has a camera on an osprey nest, the famous Rachel and Steve ospreys that have lived on Hog Island and now have 2 chicks. And they are the courses that are offered there include a puffin watching trip. And in the spring and in the fall, the participants in these courses can actually land on seabird islands and help our conservation program by removing invasive plants, removing plastics, removing lobster traps that wash up, and helping us to improve tern nesting habitat, put up nest boxes and shelters for seabirds. These kinds of hands-on things are ways that people can actually get out to the island and really help us make a difference.
Well, we just want to maybe thank everybody.
So it's been a pleasure spending this hour with all of you that had the time to join me. I hope that you'll come to Maine. Maybe we'll have a chance to meet on one of the trips. I hope you'll take a program on Hog Island or stop by our visitor center where I spend my summers. So thank you very much for being part of this. Thank you for watching the puffin cams and the osprey cams, and let's keep watching. Send us comments in. Tell others about the cams. Tell everybody to watch the puffins, and then we can all make a difference. Thank you for being here today.